Hi everyone. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the different types of competition and the terms that go with them. So we're going to start with the first one, which is perfect competition. And the best way to really exemplify what perfect competition is that you're either producing at the price of the good in the market, whatever that good is, or you're not producing at all. And the best example in the real world of this is apples. So apple producers in the grocery store are either producing at the cost of apples that people are demanding, or they can't produce there. If for some reason their cost of producing apples goes way up, say a drought, then they can't stay in that industry anymore because they don't have the apples anymore. And because they can't produce at the cost that the market is demanding. So that's a key differentiator. There are a lot of industries in perfect competition, but the reality of it is people are producing a very similar product. And so if you're not producing at what the market is demanding for the price of the product, a straight line, for example, in your graph, then you can't produce there. Another way to sort of talk about it is if you're not producing at where supply is equal to demand at that intersection, then you can't produce in that perfect market, that perfect competition, because customers are going to switch out from your product to something else. They're going to buy a different brand of apples, for example. And we often do that. So if we don't like one pair of apples, a particular season, we'll go find another pair of apples in the grocery store. All right, second, monopoly. The key really differentiator of a monopoly is that it really is talking about one industry in a market. But this is not necessarily bad. We often think about monopolies as, the Rockefellers and Carnegies and all the things that happened in the early 20th century. But, even think about sometimes local contractors in the state will only say Verizon can operate only in this area, or Cox can operate only in this area, or a utility company can operate only in this area. If they're saying that, they're giving a monopoly to a specific company. And that happens. And that typically means that service is worse because they don't have to worry about competition sometimes. But it's not unusual. It's not something that doesn't happen today. And I really want to emphasize that. But it's also really just one industry in that space. You don't have a monopoly if you have two industries in that space. You don't have a monopoly if you don't have a monopoly if you have four industries in that space. Next, monopolistic competition. What's tricky about this is that it sounds like monopoly, so you think it's bad. But actually, this is the best one yet. And why is because this operates like most of the real world does nowadays, where products are slightly different from each other. So it's not like perfect competition in which people immediately substitute away for another product if they don't like the apples. There's enough different product categories in that market that there's not immediate substitutes. So what you tend to see is that there are a lot of industries here. People don't have to produce at the market price if they don't want to, like in perfect competition. And people are producing sort of a slightly differentiated different product. There could be slight subtle differences. Like think about trash cans. You could have a plastic trash can that just is a plain bucket. Or you can have a trash can that you wave your hand over it, it opens for you, says something nice about you because it's automated, and then it closes the door for you after that. There's a difference. It's the same market. The products are slightly differentiated. So one group of people is occupying that value slot, and another group of people is occupying that sort of cheaper slot. All right, final one. Oligopoly, and I think that was number 4 or something like that. Again, some of the key differentiators: perfect competition, so you take the price of the market. Monopoly, one industry. Monopolistic competition, lots of industries, but the key is they're producing slightly differentiated products from each other, so that it's not producing the same thing. It's not a choice amongst apples. It's a choice amongst a Microsoft computer and a HP computer, which would be a really good example. Oligopoly, though, is the final form. And think of it this way. There are 3, maybe 4, a small group of highly concentrated industries in this industry. So the best example I can come up with, the Microsoft, Google, and Apple. You have the Google Play Store, you have the App Store for Apple, and you have the Microsoft App Store. And maybe bringing Kindle along with this is you got the Amazon App Store too. And do you have any other app stores? No, because this market space is really dominated by Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Apple. So what ends up happening is that because there's only a few industries in here, it's not that they're communicating with each other. They're not trying to price fix or anything like that. OPEC is an example of this gone badly sometimes, when OPEC price fixes and sort of says, oh, we're going to charge much higher for gas now. And this is not the case. In the definition of oligopoly, the definition of oligopoly doesn't include this active communication part. It includes the strategy part. And the strategy comes into play when you realize that all the firms in the industry produce a very similar product. And so what one person does has a much stronger connection to what the other person does, or what the other person might do. So you adjust based on the information you're getting from your competitors. This is often the case too why we have intellectual property rights, because this information is important, and monopoly can turn into monopolistic competition unless the monopoly has the only say on being able to sell the EpiPen for 20, 30, 40 years. And in fact, patents are, in a sense, monopoly producers, because they are giving unique selling rights to only one producer for a specific product typically. Same with sort of like oligopoly. Information is important because information is important because, let's say, a patent protection is infringed upon and Chinese steal our stuff. It's in the news, so I'm going to phrase it that way. But if that happens, that patent is not doing what it was supposed to do, which was giving this incentive to this innovator to actually innovate. And instead, now you're having a monopolistic competition because new industries are forming because information is lost. Oligopoly, same thing. If a competitor in an oligopoly, because it's producing a very similar-ish product to the other people, if they're able to do something because of some information they have, maybe they figured out how to produce things for cheaper, and they don't tell anybody else, and the information doesn't get to the other competitors, but they see suddenly this competitor's really doing something to make their product cheaper, then this oligopoly could then turn into a monopolistic competition, or vice versa. Or competitors going to act to the information that they do see in the oligopoly and say, oh, this one person in the oligopoly is producing stuff for cheaper. Let's invest in R&D. Let's see if we can produce it cheaper than them. So there's this interplay. And that's sort of the final part that I want to really emphasize. Perfect competition doesn't necessarily turn into monopolies or stuff like that, but there's interplay between like monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. There's a connection between those three, and they interact with each other. in how you define the market and what is the market. I hope this was helpful, and let me know any questions.